This is the case number LT0690T, the prosecutor versus Gotovina, Termak, and Market.
Thank you, Madam Registrar. The defense of Mr. Gotovina has announced that it would like to make an opening statement. The other parties have announced they would not, at least not at this stage. Therefore, Mr. Mistic or Mr. Keogh, are you ready to give your opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Then please proceed.
Mr. President, Your Honor's learned colleagues on the defense and the prosecution. Mr. President, Your Honors, my name is Gregory Keogh. I am honored here to represent the man, General Ante Gotovina, in this matter before the court. I sat here yesterday for the better part of the day, Your Honors, and thought about many of the things that were being stated about General Gotovina by the prosecution. I don't know where this has gone wrong. I don't know how the office of the prosecutor has gotten this so wrong. But we will attempt at this part of the opening to begin to explain and to elaborate. In my portion of the opening, Mr. President and Your Honors, I will talk about the general overview of the area. I will then turn to my colleague, Mr. Milosevic, who will then talk about Operation Storm and the participation of General Gotovina in detail. As I sat here yesterday and listened to what was said by the prosecution, it was not so much what the prosecution said, but what they didn't say that was starkly evident. What was starkly evident was that there was no deportation once Operation Storm commenced on the morning of August the 4th of 1995. Because the Republika of Craneeno had always planned to remove their people from the area, a matter that was never brought forth to the court. There was no excessive shelling of Craneeno on either the 4th or the 5th. How do we know that? We know that from very practical concerns. Practical concerns that were evident to the prosecution that they chose not to share. And the first and foremost practical concern being brought forth to the court is the Brioni tape, to which both Mr. Teager and Mr. Westby referred. And in that tape, President Tudjman cautions General Gotovina and the other military commanders not to expend unnecessary rounds. Do not shell like we are Americans and Russians because we do not have the munitions. A fact that wasn't brought out by the prosecution, yet starkly evident in the face of their argument that there was excessive shelling. They didn't bring out that the one person that the United Nations had tasked in Craneeno to determine whether civilian targets had been shelled, Steiner Hertnes, who is the chief of the UN military observers, did such an examination on the 18th of August. And in that examination, he concluded that the artillery attack by the HV was proper and directed towards military targets and not towards civilian targets. That particular report, along with its author, are the only hard evidence to come before this court by the United Nations at the time. What is interesting to note is that this witness, this head of the Military Monitoring Commission, has been removed from the witness list by the prosecution.
No, that's not interested to know, but the court knows that because
Yes,
there is litigation about that, Mr. Keogh. So therefore,
I understand, Judge.
yes, that's be very practical.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please proceed.
And moving on practicalities and talking about the issue of that shelling, the prosecution has made much that the shelling was designed to bring terror to the civilian population. What is not brought to your attention is the actual law in that regard, that the ICRC in their commentary on the protocols says that that is a natural consequence of a military attack, and that attacks on armed forces are purposely conducted brutally in order to intimidate the enemy soldiers and to persuade them to surrender. Probably more important than anything else that was overlooked with regard to General Gotovina is that he was an operational commander. An operational commander that with his armies was able to do that which no other army was able to do. In the midst of a time frame when the Bosnian Serb army with Ratko Mladic at its helm and President Karadzic running the Republic of Srpska, the Bosnian Serbs were attempting to solidify their hold on their grounds gained and to connect the Krajina with the lands held by the Bosnian Serbs. There was one person here, Mr. President and Your Honors, that brought about the demise of the Bosnian Serb army and the end of the war in the former Yugoslavia. The one person at the head of those armies that brought the carnage in the former Yugoslavia from 1991 to 1995 to an end. One person, that man. At the direction of the HV and then in conjunction with the Bosnian Muslim army, brought to heel that which international armies were never able to do. And what was also not brought to your attention was that Operation Storm was a series of plans that were designed to bring the Bosnian Serbs to heel. It started in summer of '95 with taking of the high ground over Craneeno. It then moved to Operation Storm in the 1st, 4th, and 5th of August. It then moved in September and October to Operation Mistral and Operation Southern Movement, all being directed by General Gotovina to finally defeat the Bosnian Serb army and bring them to the negotiating table and to put this carnage to an end. That is the man who sits before you. But I think, Your Honor, Mr. President, Your Honors, in order to look to see how we got to 1995, it's important to take a look at what happened preceding that. As Your Honors know, and we're not here to rehash the history of the former Yugoslavia, by the time 1991 came around, the Yugoslavia as it was post-Second World War was falling apart. In 1991, there were public referendums both in Slovenia and in Croatia declaring independence from the former Yugoslavia. That particular referendum in Croatia was on the 25th of June, 1991. Shortly thereafter, international recognition came to Croatia. And while the Yugoslavia, as the prior Yugoslavia, being run by Slobodan Milosevic and backed by the Yugoslav People's Army, the JNA, were not particularly interested in the Slovenians leaving. They were quite interested in keeping the Serbs in the former Yugoslavia. And so what begins to evolve is the determination of, or the evolution through the words and propaganda of Slobodan Milosevic, of a greater Serbia. That all Serbs will be able to live together in one state. And that even though through public referendums within a democratic election in Croatia held in 1991 that the people decided to secede from the former Yugoslavia, such was not to be the case. Slobodan Milosevic was not going to allow Croatia to leave with the Serb population that inhabited areas such as the Krajina, Eastern Slavonia, and in Western Slavonia, which encompassed, Eastern Slavonia, Vukovar, and Western Slavonia, about midway through Croatia. And what was unleashed at that particular point was the JNA, the Yugoslav People's Army, was unleashed on the Croats in order to bring them to heel. And what happened at that juncture is nothing short of horrific. And we'll show you in a moment exactly what happened in the wake of that attack. We had an army of one of the most powerful armies in Europe unleashed on the civilian population in Croatia in order to bring them to heel. And one might ask why the Croats didn't fight back. Well, the reality is, Your Honors and Mr. President, that in 1991, the Republic of Croatia had nothing with which to fight back. It was a new country with no army and no military, and was pitting itself against one of the most powerful and largest armies in Europe, the Yugoslav People's Army. And in conjunction with this attack by the JNA, we have the formulation within the Republic of Krajina of many of the individuals that you hear throughout this: Milan Martic, Milan Babic, Radovan Karadzic, and last but not least, General Mladic. Interestingly, going back as early as 1991, when the Republic of Krajina was coming into its incipiency, with Milan Martic at its head, with Milan Babic, one of the members, the officers of the JNA that was supporting their tasks, was none other than Ratko Mladic. And in the face of the democratically elected country, in June of 1991, the Republic of Krajina declared its independence and its existence in December of 1991. And with the assistance of the JNA, solidified their gains, both in the Krajina and in Eastern and Western Slavonia. So after a point, almost a third of the Republic of Croatia was in the hands of the Serbs or the JNA. And what happened at the hands of the JNA was nothing short of horrific. One need only look what happened to the beautiful town of Vukovar, a Baroque city on the coast of the Danube, to begin to understand the carnage that was inflicted on the Croatian population throughout the latter part of 1991 until the end of the war in the end of the ceasefire in November of 1991. Let me show Your Honors and Mr. President a short piece of that carnage for Your Honors to understand just a brief history of what this country had gone through in order to declare itself as a sovereign, if we may.
Please do so.
Yes, sir.
As soon as the Slovenes and the Croats announced their independence, Milosevic started the war. He bungled an attack on Slovenia, but after the humiliation he turned his attention to Croatia. His military strategy consists of first bombarding his target from the air, then the troops pound the area with long-range missiles. After a while, the tanks move in, followed by swarms of militiamen. Terrible acts of brutality and looting have taken place within these homes. We see only the after effects when nothing has been left worth a price on the black market. Leaders of the European Union decided to send the British nominee, Lord Carrington, to intervene between what they called the warring factions. Diligently, he drew up one agreement after another for a ceasefire, each of which Milosevic eagerly signed and just as eagerly broke. Nothing compared in horror to the siege of Vukovar.
They wanted to rob them of their past, their history, their memories, their identity. They wanted to make it as if they had never existed. They burned their books, their archives, their records, their manuscripts, their registers of births and deaths, all in the name of ethnic cleansing. They smashed their ancient monuments, even their gravestones and their churches, always their churches. But they could not kill the spirit of the people of Vukovar. Against the cruelest of killing machines, they held out day after day, night after night, for as many as 90 days and nights. The Serbs boasted tomorrow Vukovar will fall, but the people would not surrender. No one came out of the cellars and begged for mercy. No one came out of cellars until the beautiful town of Vukovar was no more.
The Serbs crowed over their victory as if they had routed a force as heavily armed as themselves. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, the Serbs often accused their victims of killing their own people.
It's not Croatian territory, it's the territory of Yugoslavia. And the fact is, those Croatian forces, they are the ones who've killed, strangled and massacred the people who are living here.
They have killed all our friends, and we are not guilty. We didn't want the war. We only loved them. We don't kill them. We still don't hate. We still don't hate.
The French called for more effective intervention. In response, the United Nations Security Council imposed an arms embargo on all the republics of former Yugoslavia. But the Croats were virtually defenseless, while the Federal Army generals boasted they had stockpiled enough to keep the war going for another 6 years. Their superior technology enabled them to conquer with the greatest of ease a third of Croatia. They also wrecked, wantonly and senselessly wrecked, most of the show villages within the Dubrovnik region.
But everything depends upon the ceasefire. And after 12 ceasefires, one cannot be very optimistic that it will hold.
Lord Carrington seemed so unperturbed by the ceaseless breaking of ceasefires that the United Nations sent their own negotiator, Cyrus Vance, to see what he could do. He succeeded in establishing a temporary peace by endorsing the status quo. He brought in United Nations troops to guard the new frontier. This effectively prevented the Croats from retrieving their own territory. Though Milosevic had lost the Battle of Dubrovnik, he had cause for satisfaction. He had conquered a third of Croatia, wrecked its economy, killed over 9,000 people, made nearly 250,000 homeless, had smashed over 400 Catholic churches, and had shown what he meant by ethnic cleansing, which is, of course, fascism. Questions were asked. Why couldn't the war be stopped? What was the purpose of NATO? The Americans threatened airstrikes, and the bombing stopped, but it started again as soon as the threat was seen to be mere words. This is not, and never was, a civil war. It was mainly an unprovoked attack upon unarmed civilians by a heavily armed military force. It was genocide, as President Izetbegovic always insisted. How is it possible that we should have allowed such sights as these to be seen again in this century? The heavily armed secessionist Serbs easily conquered 2/3 of Bosnia-Herzegovina. The sight on our screens of the shelling of the bread queue, later the massacre in the marketplace of Sarajevo, shocked the world. Never were our leaders so contemptible as when they pretended not to know whether perhaps it had been the Muslims themselves who had been responsible for the massacre. Again, people asked, why can't the war be stopped? Our leaders, having no policy of their own, could only respond to the public outcry.
Mama mi je baš tude bila čepala. Tako je ona pala i nisam vidio nju, samo je bila ovako odstavljena i nisam vidio nju, a tad sam vidio ovako leži i raznesena mu doze noga i vidim okreće glavu i pogleda u meni i onda vratio glavu i unesvijestio.
What does one say to the growing up children of murdered parents? What does one say to them? How does one persuade the children of the Bosnians to accept European values when Europe is what has murdered their parents? How does one argue against the power of another ideology which is supplying them with guns? It's very hard to see, and if 10 years from now, 15 years from now, these kids have grown up and we find ourselves, with a Hamas or a Hezbollah sitting on the edge of Western Europe and launching revenge attacks, revenge for the death of long dead parents, what are we going to say to them? Do we say, you are the terrorists? How can we call them terrorists when they have been so terrorized?
Our leaders have reneged on every relevant international agreement which they have signed on our behalf. Our leaders have closed their minds and hardened their hearts to the consequences of what they propose. A tolerance, almost an approval, of a fascist regime not far from our own doorsteps. Ghastly atrocities are at this moment being committed in the name of ethnic cleansing. As for ourselves, how can we live with the shame of looking the other way?
Mr. President, Your Honors, I wanted to show you that video.
Mr. Keogh, we asked ourselves why. Because this chamber is interested to hear the facts about the background of the conflict. Whether the chamber is interested in what music has been chosen to underline pictures, which we do not know to what extent it's journalistic material or whether it really represents what it says. Of course, the background of the conflict, atrocities committed elsewhere against Croats, against Muslims, etc., is certainly relevant. Let's keep it to facts. We are not a jury. And of course, what the chamber asked itself when looking at this video, whether in the exercise of the right of an accused to be tried in a public hearing, whether it was the public who was looking at how you addressed the court, or whether it was the court that was allowed to observe how you address the public. Please proceed.
Your Honor, the essence of this is how this all began. And in order to understand Operation Storm and what happened in its aftermath, it's essential to see what transpired prior to that and what happened throughout the evolution of this. What's also significant in this particular issue concerning Vukovar, Your Honor, is that, and I will show you a short video of a comparison between what happened in Vukovar and what happened in Craneeno. And I ask Your Honor and Mr. President to look at these facts.
Yes, Mr. Keogh, I take it that the message was clear.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, so therefore we don't have to compare who ill-treated, mistreated, because this chamber, of course, follows not only what is now shown, but of course has a lot of facts available on the basis of the case law of this tribunal and of the case law in the republics of the former Yugoslavia, where the chamber is not presented a journalistic impression. And I have a question to you in relation to this, but can follow what has happened on the basis of evidence that was presented and that was challenged. I do not know whether this videos later will be tendered into evidence and on what basis.
It will, Your Honor.
It will. Okay, then we'll see whether whether there are any objections to that. Could you at least inform us at this moment what we looked at, who broadcasted it, who...
The BBC, the prior, Your Honor?
Yes.
As the note had at the beginning of that, it was the British Broadcasting Corporation,
yes,
the BBC.
That's fine. Then we'll see what happens if this is tendered into evidence, whether there's any objection against it. But the chamber is most assisted by, of course, giving the background, fine, but then to focus on what is at the core of this case. Please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. And I would like to turn to this a split screen comparison between Vukovar and Craneeno that we will also...
Yes, we'll look at it. I could split my screen and present whatever images. Let's look at it and see whether it assists
Yes, Your Honor.
the chamber. Please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
It becomes quite clear to the chamber what you're showing by a selection of pictures that
Yes, Your Honor.
under the heading of clean, you show buildings that are mainly intact.
Yes, right.
And under Vukovar, you present buildings that are heavily damaged. If
That's
that
right.
is what you want the court to understand, then you have succeeded, and that it is the position of the defense that whereas clean, the buildings were not that much damaged, that was totally different in Vukovar. The chamber has understood this. Please proceed.
And, Your Honor, that the Office of the Prosecutor never charged an illegal shelling case for Vukovar.
You know what is... Please proceed.
If I may, Judge, that one might ask how this happened, and as I referred to you before, and this is significant towards the evolution of this case, because when we look back at 1991, there was no army of the Republic of Croatia. It was beginning to build, it was beginning to train, but they had nothing to fight the JNA. So what happened after the Serbs and the JNA had solidified their gains in the Republic of Croatia was that the Vance Plan came in that was referred to in the video, and in January of 1992, and I have back up on the screen, we see the areas in the map in orange that have been taken by the Serbs, both the Craneeno Serbs and with the JNA, that then became UN-protected areas and that were solidified by the Vance Plan. So what the Vance Plan actually did in 1992 was to, in fact, solidify the gains of the Serbs. Now, the design of that plan, with the oncoming of UNPROFOR in 1992, was that the United Nations, as the Martich judgment ruled, was designed to ensure that the areas remain demilitarized and that all persons residing in them were protected from fear of armed attack. Unfortunately, from 1992 until Operation Flash and Operation Storm in 1995, nothing could be further from the truth. If we turn our attention to the Special Rapporteur's report from 1994, paragraph 136, that's on the screen. According to UNHCR statistics from 1994, 800 to 900 Croats, many of whom are elderly or disabled, have remained in UNPA's, United Nations Protected Areas, Sector South. It is estimated that 44,000 Croats lived in the area before the conflict broke out in 1991. Demographic estimates of UN Protected Area UNPA Sector North from 1994 indicate that out of a total population of 112,000, 1,000 Croats and Muslims have remained despite earlier ethnic cleansing. Suffice it to say that the Vance Plan and its designs by the United Nations to protect both the Croat and the Muslim ethnic populations in the UN-protected areas was a disaster. The reports of ethnic cleansing, killings, sufferings, and other injuries inflicted on the Croat and Muslim population from 1992 through 1995 are vast. This, in the face of the idea of the Vance Plan that these areas, including the Craneeno, was still part of the Republic of Croatia. And suffice it to say, during that entire period of time, there was no successful diplomatic effort to bring those areas back into the Republic of Croatia. So how did they fight back? What was the Republic of Croatia to do? What the Republic of Croatia did, luckily enough, was have people like Ante Gotovina come back, a man who had spent some time in the French Foreign Legion in the military, to come back, to save the homeland, to begin to train the troops. General Gotovina had no background in traditional J&A doctrine that you saw inflicting injury on Vukovar. He came back in 1991 and worked his way up through the various ranks in the Croatian army, taking the rank as a man who led from the front. Not a staff officer back in headquarters, but a man who led from the front that showed his troops the way to go, and he rose to the top. Truly, he had help. You will see during the course of this trial that the United States authorized a company called MPRI to come in with the Croatian army to assist in the building of the Croatian army. General Gotovina set up a officers training school where international humanitarian law was taught. Those graduates of that academy graduated for the first time in 1994. Truly an army that was growing right before his eyes. But throughout it all, Mr. President, Your Honors, it was a man, this was an officer.
Mr. Keogh, it's now approximately 25 times that when you talk about Mr. Gotovina,
Yes, Your Honor.
that you turn your back to the court and turn to Mr. Gotovina. If you address the court, the chamber by now, after 25 times, knows where Mr. Gotovina is seated. That's to our right. Therefore, again, this is not a theater. This is a court of law, where a professional bench hears your opening statement. Please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. This was a man who's never lost sight of what he thought was right and wrong through leading his men in battle, Mr. President, Your Honors. And I would like to show you, Your Honor, a brief interview of an individual who will present himself to Mr. President and Your Honors concerning who General Gotovina was in the face of that battle.
Please play the video.
General Gotovina mi je tada samo zamolio da dođem, ali mi nije.
At the time, General Gotovina had only asked me to come, but he didn't tell me there was an impending military operation called Maslenica, which was conducted 5 days after my meeting with the commissioned and non-commissioned officers in the Zadar hinterland. General Gotovina certainly wanted me to set forth the Catholic principles regarding conduct in war. These issues interested both him and his associates who were present, so that through the lecture, the conference, and the discussion, which were held, I relate the teachings of the Catholic Church concerning the conduct of soldiers in a war in which they are defending their homeland, in order to set forth the position on how to conduct oneself in military operations, in military action, which was then imminent. I didn't know at the time. He didn't reveal to me why he had invited me, but I saw afterwards and later on in numerous conversations with the General we recalled this event. In later conversations, because he told me it was of great importance to him that as a bishop I set forth the Catholic teachings so that his commissioned and non-commissioned officers could abide by these Catholic teachings during war. We were taught that during war one must remain ethical and that there are limits to legitimate defense which must not be crossed. When discussing ethics in war and peace, I told the Croatian officers it was necessary to conduct a legitimate defense and that one must not go beyond the limits of legitimate defense, nor should one be destructive. I told them that it's not ethical to rape, to loot, or to commit any form of evil. Everything that is necessary in order to defend your country and which does not humiliate others, that should be woven into military ethics, into the ethics of those who are at war. My perception of General Gotovina, judging from my meetings with him, is a positive one. In my opinion, General Gotovina is a man who upheld war ethics and a man who said to me, after I'd held the conference, "Your Excellency, it is very important to me that you addressed my officers, my commissioned and non-commissioned officers, with those words, which I shall repeat to them constantly so that they adhere to them." When I met General Gotovina after Operation Maslenica and later on during other operations, he would visit me, as I told you, for Christmas, Easter, or New Year, and he told me that he kept my words in mind all the time.
Suffice it to say, Mr. President and Your Honors, that when General Gotovina was instructing his troops, he was instructing his troops to act ethically, honestly, and morally. We move ahead, Your Honor, and much has happened during this period of time between 1992 and 1995. Certainly, the rise of the Bosnian Serb army solidifying their gains in conjunction with the gains in Croatia were taking place. Diplomacy had failed on the international level throughout 1992, 93, and 94, with the Bosnian Serbs repelling the Vance-Owen plan and also the contact group plan in 1994. I know Your Honors know much about that. But clearly, the year 1995, after the international community had tired of the war in the former Yugoslavia, clearly that was the point at which the end game was going to come about. The Bosnian Serbs understood that this was their time to solidify their territorial gains. And that is what they set out to do. The Republic of Srpska and the Republic of Craneeno commenced in 1995 to bring about that end game. In February of 1995, specifically 20 February 1995, the Republic of Srpska and the Republic of Craneeno announced the formation of a joint defense council. They were henceforth formally operating together. In March of 1995, President Radovan Karadzic set forth his end game for the eastern enclaves of Srebrenica and Žepa, and we have it before the screen. The first such goal is the separation from the other two national communities. The second strategic goal is the corridor between Semberia, Craneeno. There will be no Craneeno, Bosnia Craneeno, or Serb Craneeno, or alliance of Serbian states if we do not secure that corridor. The sixth strategic goal is the access of the Serbian Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the sea. In a directive that was given in March of 1997 by Radovan Karadzic concerning the solidification of their goals in Srebrenica and Zepa, the Office of the Prosecutor has described it as such. Directive 7 directed the Bosnian Serb army to complete the physical separation of Srebrenica from Zepa as soon as possible. Preventing even communication between individuals in the two enclaves by planned and well-thought-out combat operations create an unbearable situation of total insecurity with no hope of further survival or life for the inhabitants of Srebrenica. That was in March of 1995. In May of 1995, the ceasefire expired. On May 26th of 1995, the Bosnian Serbs took UN peacekeepers hostage. As we move into July of 1995, given the state of affairs in the former Yugoslavia, with no hope of bringing about a peaceful solution to this, the United Nations considered evacuating its peacekeepers. And then the final endgame began, with the attack on Srebrenica and Zepa in the first week of July of 1995. Unfortunately and tragically, as Mr. President, your honors know, the world stood by while more than 7,000 Bosnian Muslim men were taken out and executed. The response by the international community was virtually nothing. And let it not be said that that was the only theater of operation that the Serbs were operating in at that time. As you can see on the map that is on the screen, the enclaves of Srebrenica and Zepa, and thereafter Gorazda, were under siege. And clearly, as they moved to their end game to solidify their goals, they had to move to the circle that is number 1 up in the corner, which is the Beachy pocket. Now, Mr. President, I know you've heard quite a bit about the Beachy pocket. And your honors, the Beachy pocket was an enclave, a Bosnian Muslim enclave that was surrounded by the Bosnian Serbs. Why was it so important? It was important because with that fall, a potential fall of Beachy, the Bosnian Serbs, along with the Croatian Serbs, would be unified. The goal of a greater Serbia would have been achieved, and the goal set forth by Radovan Karadzic that we talked about previously would have been brought about. It was essential that Beachy not fall. Why else was it essential for Beachy not to fall? Because is there any doubt that if Beachy fell, that the rivers of northwest Bosnia, like Srebrenica, would have run red with the blood of Bosnian Muslims at the hands of Ratko Mladic? I submit to you there is no doubt about that. And after the gains in Srebrenica and Zepa were solidified, the new Krajina Serb General Mrskić, began the move on Beachy and launched an attack on the 17th of July. Bring that back, the map back, please. On the 17th of July of 1995. What fear did that run through the international community? Go to the next thing. Ambassador Galbraith of the United States said the greatest evil was the possible fall of Beachy and the risk of the massacre of 40,000 people. In Ambassador Galbraith's testimony in Milosevic case, we were deeply concerned that Beachy would fall, that it would become another Srebrenica. It was 4 times as populous as Srebrenica, so we were concerned that we could see 30,000 to 40,000 people being massacred if Mladic and the Bosnian Serbs did the same thing. In his testimony in March, Ambassador Galbraith reiterated these comments. Do you have that? In July of 1995, the Bosnian Serb army had overrun Srebrenica, massacred some 7,000 men and boys. It had overrun another safe area, Žepa, and it, along with the forces of the RSK, was launching an attack on Beachy that looked like it might prevail. This was intolerable for the Croatian government, as indeed was intolerable for the United States. The Croatians feared that if Beachy was overrun and that there would be another massacre, the survivors would end up in Croatia, which already had been burdened by receiving some 2 million refugees passing through the country since 1991. That it would create a solid Western Serb entity of the RSK, plus the Bosnian Serb territory, so it would put Croatia at a strategic disadvantage, and the Croatian government was not going to let that happen. They saw that there was no prospect of successful peace negotiations with the Craneeno Serbs, given the attitude of the accused, who was Milan Maric, who refused to negotiate. In response, the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Republic of Croatia met and split in July of 1922, July of 1995, July 22nd, 1995. And the agreement was to allow the Bosnian Serb army to operate in conjunction with the army of the Republic of Croatia, and for allow the HV to operate in Bosnia. You see, what was happening at this juncture was that RSK troops were moving from the Craneeno into Beachy. And with the permission of the of the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina, General Gotovina led an attack on July the 27th in Grahovo to take the pressure off the Beachy pocket and to allow the Beachy pocket and the army of Bosnia and Herzegovina to survive. He led that attack commencing on the 26th of July and was successful by the 27th of July. And Mr. President, Your Honors, it worked. There was a withdrawal from the attack on Beachy at that time, and Beachy did not fall. The Bosnian Serbs, in conjunction with the army of the Serb Craneeno, were unsuccessful in taking that. Nevertheless, notwithstanding the loss of Grahovo, Milan Maric, then the president of the Republika Serb Krajina, had no desire to live in a Republic of Croatia in peace, had no desire to engage in any negotiations to bring about a peaceful resolution of this. And we hear as much in a conversation that he had in Craneeno shortly after the fall of Grahovo in the 27th of July.
Nobody has the right to stop halfway and to reconsider whether we could have lived with our demons. It is clear that such a life is impossible, and for this reason we are keeping only one thing in mind. We haven't been offered any possibility of peace. We aren't in a position to choose peace. We are being offered slavery, a life of uncertainty, and a fight for freedom. And with regards to this choice, I'm fully committed towards the fact that we have to fight to the end in our fight for freedom. We need to bear in mind only one thing: how to remain strong in a military sense and capable of defending ourselves. After having repeated the opinion that the Republic of Srpska Krona shall never be a part of Croatia, President Mladic especially stressed the conviction that the Serb people have the strength to endure that honourable fight for their existence, to be fought until the very end, and to show the demons that the Republic of Srpska Krona was and will remain Serb ethnic territory.
And to solidify that, Your Honor, I'm sorry, Your Honor. And to solidify that, Your Honor, what the Bosnian Serbs and the Craneeno Serbs were doing was preparing for war. We can turn our attention to the video of 18, please.
Bosnian Serbs and their allies crisis meetings, not because America has moved one step closer to lifting the arms embargo, and not because NATO is threatening robust action to protect the remaining safe areas. It is the prospect of an all-out conflict with the Croatian army that prompted this Council of War. The Bosnian Serb military commander, General Ratko Mladic, meeting rebel Serb commanders from Croatia to plan a joint strategy. The military council meeting.
As this is going on, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I apologize, Judge.
I'm following the translation, and if you take a little break so that they can finish the French translation, then please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Well, the Bosnian Serbs and the Craneeno Serbs are preparing for war. They are also trying to give the view and buying time through some efforts or supposed efforts on their part at diplomacy. And we had a series of meetings that were going on in Geneva in the first few days of August. But what is clear from this, in this particular tape of the 2nd of August of 1995, was that Mladic had no intention whatsoever of engaging in any peace negotiations. If we look at the center of that page, and they are talking about a Z4 plan, and the Z4 plan was the plan being proposed by Ambassador Galbraith, which, among other details, allowed for the peaceful reintegration of the Craneeno Serbs into the Republic of Croatia. The individual says they are dispersed there, but we cannot accept the Z4 plan. Mladic, out of the question. There will be no discussions about the Vance plan or about Z4. They have no interest whatsoever in engaging in this. What they are engaged in, Your Honors, is a plan for war. This is all within a few days of each other, Your Honor, and I will turn our attention to exactly one last item, which is the BBC broadcasting reflection of a Radio Craneeno broadcast, and about midway down.
You have to slow down for the
Yes, Your Honor.
interpreters. Perhaps if you repeat your last few sentences.
Yes, Your Honor. What we have on the screen before us is an article that comes from a BBC World Report concerning the negotiations in Geneva. And suffice it to say from this article, and we need not go into it in detail, is that Mladic and the Craneeno Serbs have no interest whatsoever in negotiating a peaceful resolution. And coming until the first few days in August, with this intercept and the other information coming from the Craneeno Serbs, President Tudjman, General Gotovina, and others know it. The only thing that they are doing is buying time and preparing for war. And the person that is going to lead that war in conjunction with the General Mrskic is none other than Ratko Mladic. And then in July 30th of 1995, General Mladic comes to Craneeno to discuss that matter. If we can turn to the videotape.
General Ratko Mladic, the legendary commander of the main staff of the Republika Srpska army, are old acquaintance and one of the Serb legends. So, this is an opportunity to use the presence of General Mladic to address you and to ask him questions concerning the current situation, which is of great importance to the Serb people, critical. So, I now give the floor to General Mladic and will not be taking up any more of your time. So, Mr. General, please go ahead. Thank you very much. If I could, I would like to take this opportunity to use the media in order to address the people, to greet the people of the Republic of Srpska Krona. We are here together. I've always been here, even if I left and was away for a while. I never really left here. Maybe, for starters, Mr. General, how do you perceive the situation as a whole in the Republics of Srpska and the Republic of Srpska Krona? Currently, I would say that the situation is quite complex due to an extensive aggression being conducted by the Croatian armed forces against the Republic of Srpska, the goal of their operation being to cut off the Republic of Srpska Krona and to use their weapons and the assistance of mediators and pressure by the international community to enforce a solution in the area by means of force. I do, however, hope that with the help of good organization and the function of all segments of the Serb people in both the Republic of Srpska and the Republic of Srpska Krona, the outcome will be a successful one. I think the Croats have made a crucial mistake in this war, and it is going to cost them dearly. Do the Serbs have enough strength to withstand the Muslims and the Croats? The Serb people have enough forces and sufficient strength. Had countries from the German and Islamic bloc not provided support, unfortunately, along with the support of some others, they would have lost this war long ago. Any prolongation of this war is disastrous, first of all for those who started it, and here I mean the Croatian armed formations. Mr. General, from a strategic point of view, in my humble opinion, I think the Croat forces are quite stretched across the territory now and towards the defense lines of our Serb defense forces. To what extent, with respect to our strategy, can this be of use for a successful strategic strike to retake and liberate our territories? Now, I won't address this question. You pose a good question, taking into consideration the fact that you express typical journalist curiosity. I wouldn't answer your question with any particularly high degree of precision. Time will show, and time will answer your question. Mr. General, what is the current situation in the Grahovo and Glamoch battlefields? Croatia's military formations have carried out attacks, have entered Grahovo, and in part Glamoch as well. I do hope that we will retake these and other occupied territories of the Republic of Srpska very soon. Among other issues, we are interested in the situation in Grahovo and Glamoch in the area of responsibility of the 2nd Krona Corps. All sorts of rumors are being circulated among the public, even by some public information agencies in the Serb territories. There is insufficient defense coordination between the Republika Srpska Krona and Republika Srpska. There are even rumors and attempts to stir unrest among the population. There are talks of some sort of selling out or surrender of our liberated lands for a greater gain. First of all, I won't be getting into commenting on this calculated propaganda, low-intensity propaganda. As far as I'm concerned, the Serb population is unified from Kupa to Korana and all the way to Timok and South Morava. I feel the Serb people in those territories, as should all other peoples on the planet, have the same interests, the same state, and remaining structures of such a state. And I believe that with regard to that, what is going on in every part of those territories, needless to say, is with every individual on the planet, that Serbs should be allowed to demonstrate an interest in at least the same degree as any other modern state demonstrates for its citizens living within their state or in foreign territory. Surprised you by his presence, but this doesn't mean that they have asked me many questions up to now, and they know what I think inaudible. You posed a good question. This isn't the first time the Ustasha formations attacked our lives. That was a good question. This isn't the first time the Ustaša formation has attacked our lives. However, I believe the time has come that our people as a whole realized something that many have come to realize during this war, and something that I had been indicating all along. I believe terrible mistakes were made by individuals who claimed the war with the Croats was over once for all, or that it would be over within 7 days. And then in the lines, along the lines of separation, numerous checkpoints were being opened, customs zones, and in some places there were even soccer games being held. As you can see, these proved to be costly decisions, resulting in the loss of lives, numerous refugees, and burned villages. But I hope our people have now understood this, and they have enough strength, they will muster enough strength, so that this aggression by Croatia, which has been present with its armed forces during the whole time of this war in the whole territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, be avenged, and so that we send them back to where they belong, their own territory. I just want to send my regards to the people. I want to tell them they should remain resolute in defending their century-old historical heart and graves, and not to give in to any acts of provocation or any form of propaganda, because it is only with the means of our own forces that we are creating our state. A state can be made only by using one's own children, and so many of our wonderful children have given their lives for both the Republika of Srpska, Craneeno and the Republika of Srpska, which should motivate the rest of us who are still alive and on our feet to apply additional efforts, and we remain focused on the final stage of this war, until the final victory. That's right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
So, Your Honor, quite clearly from this, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I don't know if that French translation was finished.
Yes, please proceed.
It's quite clearly from this interview in Craneeno during this period of time they are getting prepared for one thing and one thing only, which is to bring about the final solidification of their territorial gains. And how were they going to do that? In what fashion were they going to do that? Were they going to take the Beachy pocket and other lands taken by the army of the Republic of Croatia in a fashion in accordance with international humanitarian law? Or were they going to use the tasks and methods employed in Srebrenica and Zepa? Ratko Mladic answers that himself.
Mr. General, would the Muslims from Beachy continue to provoke the Serb defense in the area of Rebic and they're on much longer? Yes, and they will, until they have been completely defeated, as they were in Srebrenica and Zepa.
As they were defeated in Srebrenica and Zepa, there is no doubt what would happen if General Gotovina and the HV had not ensured that the Beachy pocket would not fall. Had he not come forward and began not only summer '95, which was the taking of Grahovo, but then Operation Storm in August of 1995, followed by Operation Mistral, and followed by Operation Southern Movement. General Gotovina and the Army of Bosnia-Herzegovina changed the entire international landscape to bring about the defeat of the Bosnian Serbs and to end this carnage once and for all. And those words are not necessarily mine. They are the words of negotiators on behalf of the United States and the international community, and also the President of the United States. If we turn to the book on the screen, this is a excerpt from the book written by President Clinton, his memoirs, where he writes at the bottom of the page, in August, the situation took a dramatic turn. The Croats launched an offensive to retake the Craneeno, a part of Croatia that the local Serbs, we're moving to the top of the next page, had proclaimed their territory. European and some military and intelligence officials had recommended against the action in the belief that Milosevic would intervene to save the Craneeno Serbs. But I was rooting for the Croatians. So was Helmut Kohl, who knew, as I did, that diplomacy could not succeed until the Serbs had sustained some serious losses on the ground. because we knew Bosnia's survival was at stake, we had not tightly enforced the arms embargo. As a result, both the Croatians and the Bosnians were able to get some arms which helped them survive. We had also authorized a private company to use retired U.S. military personnel to improve and train the Bosnian Serb army. The Croatian army, I'm sorry. The key, Your Honor, is in the last sentence of the paragraph before, that diplomacy could not succeed until the Serbs had sustained some serious losses on the ground. That idea was echoed by Richard Holbrooke, where he noted, in quoting one of his colleagues, "I realize how much the Croatian offensive in the Craneeno profoundly changed the nature of the Balkan game and thus our diplomatic offensive." General Wesley Clark simply called it the turning point. Mr. President and Your Honors, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Mr. Misha, to talk yet further about Operation Storm in some degree of detail. But I want to end, Your Honors, with this one last point before the break. The man who brought about the turning point, Mr. President and Your Honors, the man who brought this war and this carnage to an end, sits before you. The man who, if anyone is responsible for peace and bringing an end to the war in the former Yugoslavia, is General Ante Gotovina. That is the man before you, with which I hope this court, Mr. President and Your Honors, gives full breadth and full consideration when we are reviewing the facts before us. If time permits, I may have some concluding arguments, but if not, I yield the floor to my colleague, Mr. Mishetic.
Mr. Mishetic, before you start, how much time you would need? I have to find out whether it would be more suitable to take a break now or after you've started.
I think a break would be appropriate now, Your Honor. I have a significant portion.
Then, Mr. Keogh, I've one question that for you at this very moment.
Yes, sir.
You spend a lot of time on what caused the military operations in the summer of 1995, and you spend a lot of time on explaining what the positive effect would be and to what extent it was justified to take such action. Now, I might have misunderstood Mr. Tiger yesterday, but I think in 5 lines he explained to us that he did not challenge the right of the Republic of Croatia to retake the area that was earlier taken by the Serbs, so that the mere fact that retaking and bringing back to its internationally recognized boundaries was, as far as I understand, not contested as legitimate by the prosecution. So therefore I asked myself a couple of times what actually in this respect keeps the parties apart.
I'm glad you asked that question, Your Honor, without getting into the law in this regard, but I think it's important that we ascertain the distinction between an operational commander and one who is a functional military governor or responsible for matters in his flank. And I direct Your Honor to the high command case where General von Lieb, while there was ethnic cleansing going on with various groups coming out of the SSS who were attached to General von Lieb, the court noted that General von Lieb was an operational commander. He was responsible for offensive operations. And it is what is significant and very, very important to this case, Your Honor, is for us to explain to Mr. President, Your Honors, the role of an operational commander and what he is tasked to do. And what he was tasked to do was to bring about the defeat of the Bosnian Serb army and also the army of the Republic of Serb Krajina. That being said, his responsibility vis-a-vis taking care of things that are 250 kilometers in his flank is non-existent. Even if, Van Lieb said, even if he had the potential right to intervene, he did not have direct responsibility. So what was important for the defense of General Gotovina, Mr. President, was to circumscribe and explain that he was truly an operational commander operating in the offensive with a design to bring about the defeat of the Serbs in various theaters, not only in the Craneeno, but in Bosnia-Herzegovina. It is a matter of law that these facts will apply to, and I refer back to the High Command case with the Cella Beachy Appeals Chamber cited with authority. Now, with that in mind, Judge, tasking what an operational commander is doing and how he is operating is highly, highly significant to the defense of General Gotovina.
Yes, I still do not know whether in many respects there is disagreement between the parties in this respect, but we'll then further hear about that. We'll have a break and we'll resume at 11:15.
All rise. Veuve lever.